We've had some fantastic speakers already, and today is no exception because we've got a great lineup for you. To remind you, the running order has been adjusted slightly for today. In a moment we'll be welcoming our first speaker this morning, Louise, who I'll be speaking more of in a moment. Then at 11 o'clock we have Ben Smith from Times Online Sport, who will be speaking in here. From 11 till 12 and 12 till 1 we have workshops, and these are with Adam Baker, a citizen journalist from Blotter, and he'll be talking very much about his work, and also a welcome to a couple of the citizen journalists who I know are with us today from the wider Leeds community as well, so a special welcome to them to Journalism Week. At 12 o'clock we welcome Richard Pepiat, former tabloid reporter, needs very little introduction, will be telling us his take on all the ramifications of Levison and the events that are happening in the wider world of journalism at the moment. And then at 1:30 we welcome back to Leeds Trinity Ben Earlham, who is one of our successful alumni, now working as political correspondent for ITV Yorkshire. At 2:30 it's time for some music. We've got Dave Simpson, Guardian music critic. He'll be in here as well, giving his take on music journalism. And we round off the day and we round off the week at 3:30 with a panel discussion featuring a number of Leeds Trinity's most successful alumni. So that will be happening through the day. You've got the running order. You've got the running order insert that gives you the detail of when and where everything is happening. I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome the wider audience on the live streaming, who are certainly around the world, or if not around the world, bits of Kipax, who will be able to see the material live today as well. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker this morning, and it's a real pleasure for any teacher to welcome back to an institution a successful student. As a trainer, I work in the postgraduate vocational training here. It's a particular pleasure to welcome back a successful trainee. And it's always a pleasure to welcome a great person who hasn't let fame and the kind of success she's achieved change her from the kind of person I always knew. So it's time to welcome Louise Easton, who is the regional editor for Bauer Media in this part of the world, Bauer Radio.
Hello, and thanks for having me, and thank you for my introduction. I don't know about the fame side of it, but yes, I'm the editor for Bauer Radio Yorkshire. The reason that I'm here to speak to you all today is principally about radio journalism, and specifically local radio journalism in the commercial sector. I'm also here because, as Richard alluded to, this is my university. This is where I studied for 4 years. I did my undergraduate here, and I also did my postgraduate course here as well, and loved every second of it. Really enjoyed my time at Trinity and All Saints, and quite excited to be back, albeit a little bit nervous, seeing as this is my university. It was only about 8 years ago that I actually left here, which may seem like a long time to some. Occasionally it does to me, but I guess with your other speakers it's relatively a very short time in terms of the time that they've actually been working in radio and broadcast. When I graduated from the postgrad here, I was lucky enough to go straight into a job at a radio station, and it was a radio station in the West Midlands that I got my first permanent gig. And I got that following a series of successful work placements, and also some freelancing and a bit of determination. If you take one thing from this, I would say that the value of a good work placement is vital. Make the most of any opportunity you have to go into a radio station and learn from people that are actually doing the job themselves. Also, talk to everybody, make yourself useful. Don't wait for people to ask you to do things. Volunteer, come with ideas, show a bit of initiative, and don't be afraid to make a cup of tea. And I'm sure you'll get on with everybody in the newsroom that you're working with. Also, don't be afraid to aim high. To put that into context, the reason I got my first permanent gig was not actually because I was qualified for the role that I went for. I saw an advert for a senior broadcast journalist, and bearing in mind I had a couple of work placements under my belt and 6 months of freelance, I wasn't really qualified for that role. And quite rightly, they turned me down and said, "You're not qualified for that role." However, what I offered was to stay there and freelance while they found the right person for the role because they were a member of the team down. And luckily, what happened was they changed the spec of the job and gave me another job in the team, which worked out wonderfully well for me. Had I not done that, my career path might have gone a little bit in a different strain, but I made the most of the opportunity, and thankfully they gave me the opportunity that I needed. Why did I, and why do I choose to work in local radio, specifically commercial radio? Simply, I absolutely love it. I feel really privileged and lucky to be able to say to people when they ask me what I do, the job that I do, and the fact that I can go into work and say quite happily, I absolutely love what I do, and it's like pretty much being paid for my hobby, and you can't ask much more than that, really. The reason that I like commercial radio quite so much is because I think it can have a real impact on people, and I think it can be really, really powerful. And I think when you compare it to other forms of media, it's possibly one of the quickest terms of broadcast media that there is, and there's a real versatility and flexibility in commercial radio, which I really enjoy. I also think radio as a whole is really powerful. It was kind of summed up by Jon Snow on Monday. I don't know if any of you were actually in his lecture, but he summed it up beautifully. He said that radio has the most powerful images, and that's because they're conjured up in your own mind, and I completely agree with that. I think the key to being a really successful and really good radio journalist is if you can be the eyes and ears of the people that are listening to you, so you can really paint a picture for them, so they can pretty much imagine exactly what's happening in front of you, regardless of where they are and where they're listening from. In my time in radio, I've been privileged to work in connection with some of the people and creating reports that I think make this kind of radio. And I think the ultimate test for me, and I prefer to listen to radio when I'm driving along in the car, is what I call the car test. So if you're listening to a piece of radio which actually keeps you in your car when you've arrived at your location, engine's off, you actually need to get out, but you're still sat there listening to the radio, that to me is a really good report. That's a powerful bit of radio. And luckily, I've been involved in a couple of those reports, and I've brought a selection of some audio that I've been involved in so that you can have a listen to it and hopefully see the kind of thing that I'm talking about. As you know, I work in commercial radio, and I produce and edit news there, and I think sometimes the assumption can be made that commercial radio, especially commercial local radio, is probably the poor relation to the BBC, especially local BBC. Would any of you agree with that? Guessing completely straight heads. I think sometimes that is the perception because, and I think it's down to a resource issue. If you look at commercial radio newsrooms, you'll often find that there are fewer staff, there's fewer resources available to them in terms of equipment and the time that you can spend on a report. But I don't think that means that you have to do fewer stories, go less in depth in the stories that you cover, and actually secure fewer exclusives. For me, it's all about quality over quantity, and I think with clever planning and with dedicated, talented members of the team, you can actually achieve some fantastic things, and you can work on some fantastic pieces of radio. I also think in some commercial stations, the reason why people don't rate news as highly as maybe they could or should is that some commercial groups do just use news as an Ofcom requirement, and they only have it because otherwise they wouldn't be able to have their licence. I'm lucky enough to work in a company which is Bauer Media, who really, really value local news. It's their unique selling point, and they're committed to supporting local news and local journalism from a commercial aspect. I think actually if you look across the country and you add up all the journalists that are in Bauer radio newsrooms, what you'll find is I think we are either the largest or one of the largest commercial radio newsrooms. And the reason I term us as a newsroom is that we all work together and we share a lot of ideas, and we also share a lot of audio. This morning, for example, the story about David Rathband, Metro Radio up in Newcastle have done a series of really good interviews with David Rathband, and obviously following the news of his death this morning, they were able to share that archived audio with everybody else in the rest of the group. When I say it's all about quality and not quantity, what I mean is the amount of attention and time that you focus on something, and also the end result and how that interlinks with the radio stations in which you're working in. I've got an example of this, hopefully, and it's a fairly recent one. And I'll just give you a bit of background before I play a couple of excerpts that I've put together from the day that we broadcast. This is all from Hallam FM in Sheffield, which is one of the 3 stations that I'm responsible for. It was 4 days before Christmas, and we were alerted to the fact that a house in Rotherham was on fire. Not that unusual, you may think, until you delve a little bit deeper and you find out that this house belonged to a mum of 6 children, all under the age of 13, and she was actually expecting her 7th child. As soon as we found out about it, we sent a member of the news team out to try and investigate a little bit further. And when we arrived there, we were told the story by Sam, who was this lady who owned the house, of the fact that she had gone to Asda. She had just gone to pick up the last few bits and pieces before Christmas, bearing in mind it was just 4 days beforehand. And she'd had a phone call from her neighbour saying, "Your house is on fire." She'd raced back, but by the time she got there, which was only 10-15 minutes later, her house was completely destroyed, along with everything she owned inside that house, and she pretty much had the clothes on her back and thankfully her kids with her. We went to speak to her, and again, this is a good example of reacting quickly and going out to things as soon as you hear about them rather than putting them off, because we got there, we managed to do the interview with her and her family, and after she'd done that, she decided that actually she only wanted to speak to Hallam, and she didn't do another interview with any TV stations, with any other radio stations or any newspapers. And so this audio is from the moment we started to broadcast, along with the presenter and the rest of the station who really got on board, and obviously what happened at the end. And I'll talk a little bit more about this after you've heard it. So let's see if I can get this right.
The Rotherham family are facing Christmas with nothing after a fire destroyed their entire house.
I was sat here at my nan's watching a film. I got a call from my mum saying the house is on fire. As soon as I got there, fire brigade were there already, and I just ran up. I gave a police officer the key for the house so they could get in and try and stop it from spreading. And all I could really see were just black smoke and flames everywhere.
That's 14-year-old Brandon, one of Sam Woodburn's 6 children. Their home went up in flames yesterday, leaving them without gifts for Christmas, clothes and a place to live.
I were angry, I were frustrated, upset, but like I say, I don't even think it's sank in what's happened. That everything's gone, that I left with a beautiful house and all my kids' presents, and 10 minutes later I come back to nothing. Everything gone.
Well, if you want to help Sam and her family, there's details of how you can donate on the news pages of our website.
Now, you may well have heard in Hallam FM News at 3 about the family from Rotherham, from Thurcroft, whose house burnt down yesterday. I mean, that's an incredibly traumatic thing to happen, whatever the time of year, but just before Christmas as well. They literally have lost everything. We sent our reporter, Kelly O'Donnell, to go and give them some good news for a change.
Sam, I know that you've been getting lots of people around and they've been giving you things. I just had a call from the studio, and everyone at Hallam FM has decided to give all the kids their presents this year for Christmas.
Thank you. Nothing else I can say.
We just hope that it helps you to get through what's happened, Sam.
There's nothing else I can say apart from thank you. The kids would love that.
Dr. Ibrahim Hussain. You heard all about it?
Yeah, no, I was just driving along the road. I just heard the story just then. Obviously, we're coming to Christmas. It's a tragic situation for anybody to be in. I have a building actually at the moment which we've just got planning permission to use as a dental surgery, a cosmetic clinic. We've not actually converted it yet, so at the moment it's still actually a residential dwelling. So I thought, well, I'm in no rush, so until they get themselves back on the feet, they can use that building and hopefully get them settled before Christmas. Obviously, time's short, and it might not be the perfect family home for them, but it's a nice location. Hopefully, we give them some peace of mind over Christmas.
Thank you very much on behalf of Hallam FM. I just can't say thank you enough.
Thank you very much, and I'm just glad to be able to be in this position and help all I can.
Sam is very bravely come into Hallam FM, and I hate to take you back to that horrible moment when you found out what had gone on, but just talk me through those events.
There's not really much to tell. I left my home, the family home, at 10 to 1 yesterday to go and finish some Christmas food shopping at Asda. We just pulled up, and at 1 o'clock neighbours phoned me, screaming, "Don't phone, your house is on fire."
What did you think when you first heard that? Do you think they were winding you up? I mean, it's a hard thing to take in, isn't it?
To tell you the truth, I thought, it's not going to be that bad. I wasn't expecting what I saw.
So have they got any idea what happened at all?
They called them opportunists. It were an arson attack, maybe young kids. Everything's gone within 10 minutes, everything that I've worked hard to build up for me and the kids. It's just gone.
And I don't know if you happened to hear Hallam FM a little bit early, about 4:15. We had a guy phone up, a guy called Dr. Hussain, and he says he's got a house that you can live in, rent-free, until you get back on your feet.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I believe it's in Rotherham, and so he's quite happy for you to live there as long as you need, rent-free, until, well, you get things back together.
Oh, my God. Oh, God, thank you.
I know it's going to be a difficult Christmas for you, but I hope, thanks to South Yorkshire, it's, in a way, going to be an incredible Christmas, really. So I just hope you get back on your feet as soon as possible.
We will. We will. I know it's support I've got. Thank you.
The Rotherham family, whose house burned down just days before Christmas, have been given the keys to a new home. Dr. Ibrahim Hussain heard on Hallam FM about the fire that destroyed everything Mum of 6 Sam Woodburn and her kids owned. He contacted us to say he had somewhere for them to live. We've been at the house today and asked him what made him offer up the property free of charge.
I've just become a father, a proud father now. I had my first child, a baby boy called Gabriel, and it was in my mind always about how I would feel with my child actually, not having a roof over our head, and especially at Christmas. Any time of year it's bad, but Christmas to a child is far more important than it is to an adult. I just wanted to help. I just, thought I'll do what I can.
And that was, as I say, just a few clips from the whole day. We spent every moment from 12 o'clock onwards, right up until 6, 7 o'clock that evening, following that story, and then we followed it for every single day up until Christmas Day, when she actually got the keys, as you heard at the end, and went to go and take ownership of her new home. Hopefully that gives you a good example of the impact that local commercial radio can have. I mean, a national station wouldn't have been able to cover it in the quantity that we did, and potentially wouldn't have been able to have the reaction that we did. Literally from the first moment that we started to broadcast Sam's story, we were literally inundated with offers of help and support. We had computer games consoles being brought in, we had clothes, we had furniture, carpets, curtains, and obviously, as you heard, eventually a house, which is not every day that you manage to do that for somebody. And it's a very powerful moment to be working in local radio and able to help somebody to that extent and not become part of the news, but have such an important part to play that you actually affect somebody's life directly, which is wonderful. In my time as a journalist so far, I have had the opportunity to work from some absolutely amazing scenes. I've been able to speak to some fascinating people. and been given the opportunities to access certain places and events that actually normal people working everyday lives at other jobs don't get the opportunity to get, and for that I feel really, really privileged, and that's one of the things that I love about my job. I've also been able to take part in breaking news situations, extended reports, hour-long documentaries, as well as the day-to-day bulletin reads that I do Monday to Friday. And I think that's one thing about commercial radio, is that they have the flexibility and versatility to allow the journalists that work with them to do that if the story warrants it. What I'm going to do now is play you another clip. This time it's from a special report that I did from Auschwitz. While I was working at a radio station in Shropshire, it ran every day for a week. And obviously with local radio, we focus on the local aspects, so we focus predominantly on the TSA and the listeners and the things that are relevant and the stories that affect them. And you might not see the obvious link between Shropshire and Poland, but the reason I went out there is because an organisation offered to take some children out to learn about the death camps out there as part of their history course, and they invited me to go along with them. Again, this harks back to making the most of the opportunities that present itself to you. It's not something that I'd ever planned. I hadn't thought, right, at some point in my career, I'm off to Auschwitz, I want to do a report on it. We got a phone call, and we said yes. Now, the reason I want to play you this is because it's a good example of a number of things. Predominantly, the first is making the most of opportunities, but the second is covering an old story in a new way. This report, which went out, as I said, every single evening between Monday and Friday, is far too long for me to play in full, which is why I'm only going to play you a little excerpt of it. But it did go on to win a New York award and also a United Nations award, which is an international accolade. And it went up against all different kinds of media from all over the world. And one of the reasons they said that this was honoured in that competition is because of the way it was told, because it was a unique and original way. So I'll play it to you first, and then I'll talk you through the reasons why we did it in the way that we did.
We are by the unloading platform where trains with Jewish victims arrived in 1944. It's the place where, as you know, families were separated and where the SS doctors decided who was to live and who was to die.
Bogusha has lived by these death camps all her life. She now takes people round and shows them what happened to those who were brought here.
Most of the people from here were directly sent to gas chambers, and from here, standing here, we can see two ways to gas chambers. Some victims were led along the railway tracks, and some victims were led through the gate and then left to the forest. That's where gas chambers and crematoriums number 4 and number 5 used to be.
Those generally sent straight to the gas chambers were young children, pregnant women, the elderly or the disabled. Well, standing here by the train tracks where many families would have seen their loved ones for the last time, it's difficult to get a true impression of what conditions here during the war were like. Today, it's hot and sunny, there's lots of grass and hundreds of people are walking around. They're all fit and healthy. Kitty describes a totally different environment.
Well, the whole place was swampy. So in the winter, or even most of the year, it was wet and damp, and your feet sunk into the mud right up to your knees sometimes. And in the summer, it was all caked up and dry, and then people would break their legs. So it was a very, very dangerous environment altogether.
Every year, thousands of people come to Poland to see for themselves what Auschwitz is like.
My name's Alex Gillam, I'm 18 and I study at New College Telford. Hi, I'm Lindsay Pitchford, I'm 17 and I study at the same place as Alex.
Hi, I'm Chris, I'm 18 and I study at St John Talbot's Technology College.
Right. So now we are inside the actual concentration camp. You could see there an ironical slogan in German, Arbeit macht frei, which means work makes you free. Well, in fact, we know that Himmler's principle was Vernichtung durch Arbeit, which means extermination through work. That's what was carried out in concentration camps. Work was supposed to kill you, not to liberate you.
This camp, unlike the site in Birkenau, was predominantly meant to house political prisoners, but it didn't mean they were treated any better. The Nazis used a series of torture methods to punish inmates they didn't think were working hard enough or those who tried to escape. These methods included hanging, shooting, starving and suffocation.
Well, we're in Block 11, which is known as the Block of Death by Jewish prisoners. At the moment, we're next to something called a standing cell, where it's a tiny space, about a metre by a metre, probably less, where they used to stand 4 prisoners in the night who would work during the day.
There's no facilities to go to the toilet or anything, so it must have been pretty horrific.
Really, really tiny, so you wouldn't even be able to sit down in them and just stood there all night after working. You can just imagine not sleeping. I mean, we complain that we haven't had much sleep last night. Imagine 2 weeks, no sleep. I mean, the human body's not supposed to survive like that. And so it's just degrading. It's a very slow, kind of humiliating death.
Auschwitz I is the place where the SS practiced using the disinfectant chemical Zyklon B to gas people. They tried it first in the basement of one of these blocks, but then used an old mortuary, which became the first ever gas chamber. It could kill around 700 people at one time. Chambers at Auschwitz II were more than double that in size. 2,000 people could be killed there in about half an hour.
Victims were made to believe that they would be disinfected, deloused, and that they would take showers. The gas chamber looked like a shower room. There were fake shower heads attached to its ceiling. After the victims were locked up in the pellets of Zyklon B gas, were dropped down by VSS guards from the roof through the openings which resembled chimneys. The victims were dead approximately 20 minutes, half an hour later. From the Nazis' point of view, it was a quick method to kill, while for the victims, it was a slow and painful death. Zyklon B gas caused suffocation, internal suffocation.
Okay, we've just been inside. What was that like?
Pretty strange, really. Complete silence, no one said a word, and it's surprising that that's the smallest gas chamber and there was that many people killed in there. And then as you walk out of the gas chamber, you see the furnaces that they were all put in, and that's just horrific. And you can see the tracks where they just wheeled in the people.
And if you looked up, you could see the holes where they threw the gas in.
Yeah, and you can see daylight coming through, and it's the last thing the prisoners would have seen, really, and pretty horrific.
Well, today the gas chambers at Auschwitz II have either crumbled or been destroyed. When the Nazis were defeated and shortly before the liberation, they were blown up in an attempt to hide what happened here.
We're outside the crematorium. It's a bomb site. It was destroyed by the Nazis. What we can see here is obviously the remnants of the gas chambers. It's buried deep in the ground. It's very sort of, it's quite upsetting to see. A place where sort of hundreds of thousands of people died.
That's obviously just a very small part of the report that went out. And as you can begin to hear, as it got further into the report, we heard more and more from the students, and they actually told that story, and they were the main narrators through that documentary for the whole part. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it stood out for the judges, is the fact that it was an old story told in a new way. Not only did that go on to win those awards that I've mentioned, but also schools across Shropshire now use that as a learning aid. So they use it within their history classes. And the reason they tell me that it's so effective and people actually listen to it is because it's the children telling children all about it, and they can relate to them because they're their peers. To hark back to the resources issue, I think that this as a report also highlights what you can achieve if you have the right skills and the right support and the right planning. The entire report was researched, presented and produced by 2 people, one of which was me, and the other was a very talented producer that I was working with at the time. It involved a day trip to Poland, which I can tell you was a very long day trip. It started at like 5 a.m. in the morning, it finished about midnight that night. And it involved quite a good few hours of editing and even more hours of producing. But the radio station that I was working at the time gave us that time and gave us that support and said, spend as long as you need, because we want the finished article to be great. And I think there's a flexibility in commercial radio, and the fact that you don't have to meet deadlines for deadline's sake. If it warrants it, you can spend a lot more time on it. It's also a good example of covering an old story in a new way, which I've briefly mentioned. I can hardly lay claim to the fact that that's breaking news. I mean, it's not the first time that somebody has talked about the Holocaust or Auschwitz. I wasn't even born when it happened. But the reason that I think that it worked and it was of interest to people and people responded to it was because of the way in which it was presented. And it's not something that you generally hear, I think, on commercial radio on a regular basis, especially not local commercial radio. What you'll find when you enter newsrooms is that you will take a story idea to your editor, and often you might be met with the response of, we've heard it all before, this isn't a new story, we're not very interested, go away, find something new, find me an exclusive, find me something that's going to captivate people and interest them. However, if you can find a new way of covering an old story, then you might be met with a more favourable response. And also, if you go to them with more than just an idea, maybe you've researched it previously, you've got some contacts lined up already, that again will put you in a more favourable light. The key for me to local journalism is to tell something new to people about the area in which they live. I think everybody likes to think that they know the area that they live in, their hometown, their home place, like the back of their hand. Your job as a journalist, especially in local radio, is to find that piece of news or to find that piece of information that they are not aware of and tell them about it in not only an informative way, but also a very entertaining and creative way if you can. It's not also about the way in which you present it and the content, which has to be interesting and unique if possible, but also the way that you interact with listeners and with the burst, shall we say, of things like Twitter, Facebook, social network, and stuff like that. It's so easy to interact with people and to get reaction instantly to stuff that we are using it more and more, and I'm sure you all use Twitter and Facebook on a regular basis, and you should if journalism is something that you want to go into. It also helps that technology has massively improved since the days when I was doing reports like that. To give you a bit of an understanding of what I did on that day in Poland, I took a piece of kit which is called a Sonifex, which I don't know if you're aware of. It's basically a recording device which is about this big, and it's got a battery pack on it which is about that big, of which I had to take a number of battery packs just in case one ran out. And so I had one of those on one arm and I had another one on the other arm, and then I had a backpack, a still camera, a video camera and a tripod, and that's what I carried around with me for over 12 hours. So not only was it cumbersome, it was heavy, it was a bit fiddly, and it was difficult for one person to operate, which is generally why teams doing a report like that would have more than one person working on them. Then it moved on, and when I was covering the London bombings, we used something called a Comrex, which is smaller, but still quite large in terms of what we use today. It's about so big, and you could dial up depending on the signal, and you could broadcast straight to air. There was no messing about with pre-recording it and editing it. If the presenter faded you up, you were on air wherever you were, which at the time was brilliant, loved it. However, now what we use every day, pretty much in all of the newsrooms in Yorkshire, is what I'm hoping you all have, which is a smartphone or an iPhone. It's fantastic the things that we can do on iPhones these days. We can do interviews on them. We broadcast a lot of our live bulletins directly via the iPhone, and it's a daily piece of kit. And I would suggest that if you want to be a journalist and you're dedicated about doing that and you're passionate about doing that and you don't have a smartphone or you don't have the capabilities of updating your Twitter, your Facebook, recording interviews, taking photos, taking videos, then I would advise you to get one because they are a key piece of kit to anybody. What I'm going to play you now is just a little compilation, and the reason I've picked these clips is because every single one of them was done via an iPhone. So either we've recorded it and then we've taken it back and edited it, or actually we've just broadcast it live directly from the iPhone. I'll talk a bit more about the benefits of using an iPhone and technology of that nature after you've heard this.
Hallam FM. Just gone 6 o'clock, it's the start of the Lib Dem conference today, and Charlotte's live from Sheffield City Hall.
I'm stood And in the middle of the protest outside City Hall, there's now hundreds of people here crowding around this ring of steel. There's lots of placards saying things like Nick Clegg's a Judas and accusing him of being David Cameron's poodle. There's lots of police keeping an eye on things. Although it's quite loud, it's been peaceful so far. All the delegates arriving at the conference are being booed though. Well, in the last few minutes, we've asked Employment Minister Ed Davey what he makes of the party's reception in Sheffield.
Well, I'm not sure if they're really representative of all Sheffielders, to be brutally honest. Not surprised, we're having to make some tough decisions. Labour left the country in a complete mess. The Liberal Democrats have taken some tough decisions, gone into coalition with the Conservatives, and we're going to sort out Labour's mess.
And we'll be reporting live at the conference all weekend. We'll also be tweeting all weekend too. Follow us at hallamfm.co.uk.
And I'm coming to you live from London, where the campaigners for the Children's Heart Surgery Unit in Leeds have just handed in over 500,000 signatures to number 10 Downing Street. How's it gone today, guys? Now, Kim and Isabella, who are both patients at the unit, you did the honours, knocked on number 10 Downing Street. How did that feel?
Experience of a lifetime.
It was brilliant. And Mike Blackburn, you're a heart doctor at the unit. How important is it that the unit stays in Leeds?
I think it's essential for the care of children in Yorkshire and Hull. They certainly don't want to be traipsing to further centres when they've got one that's so close.
Sheffield United fans have been invited into Bramall Lane following protests at the appointment of Danny Wilson as their new manager. Around 100 supporters gathered outside the ground this lunchtime to vent their frustration. Our reporter Sarah Cooper was the only journalist who went into the meeting with them.
We're going in.
Yeah.
Talk us what's happening.
We're going up to the inner sanctum, McCabe's Cave. I've never been up here before.
How are you feeling to be invited inside?
I think it's very... I'm actually pleased he's given us a chance to actually come and say something and put some questions to him, so you've got to give him credit for that, I suppose.
What are you going to be asking if you get a chance?
I just want to ask him, for me, I want to know, he said he wanted to reunite the supporters with the club, and this has gone the opposite way, does he realise?
This backlash all stems from the fact that Wilson made 98 league appearances for the Owls and managed them for a couple of years as well. This is what he had to say earlier about the fans' hostility.
Hopefully as they get to know me, hopefully as they get to understand the philosophy, hopefully as they get to understand the commitment that that I have at the football club, and we'll have and take it forward on, and then hopefully winning games and hopefully playing in a style of football that might just turn one or two round, and if that happens, that'll be one of the most satisfying things I can do.
Well, in the last few minutes that meeting's finished. Sarah's back with us. Sarah, what was said?
The fans have been in the meeting for 45 minutes. It was apparently very tense inside. In fact, as Danny Wilson was summing up right at the very end, some of the fans got up and left early. They told me they're not convinced by what was being said to them. One of the fans was so annoyed that he threw his season ticket on the table. So that gives you an idea of how Sheffield United fans are feeling at the moment.
Yes, well, I'm live tonight outside Leeds Cathedral, where in the last few hours, thousands have remembered the life of Sir Jimmy Savile. Sounds there from the 2-hour service which took place this afternoon, followed by Marines taking Sir Jimmy Savile to a hearse which will deliver his body to Scarborough, ready for burial tomorrow. Well, here tonight there's a quiet atmosphere, one of reflection, yes, but not actually of quiet reflection itself. Some people say that noise and laughter would have been just what Sir Jim would have wanted. As people were leaving, I bumped into Frank Bruno.
He's a very, very good diamond, very helpful father figure. You know, I mean, anytime you need a little bit of help, you're feeling down, a bit of advice, a little kick up, you know, the backside if you're feeling whatever. He's a good man, 1 in a million.
Well, as I say, the service lasted from 2 o'clock through until 4. Our reporter Lawrence Bob was there.
It began at the Queen's Hotel, then Sir Jimmy's funeral cortege drove to Woodhouse, past his childhood home, went via the LGI and arrived to applause here at St Anne's Cathedral. Despite the cold weather, hundreds turned out to pay their respects and stayed for the 2.5 hours of this Requiem Mass at St Anne's Cathedral. Among those watching on the big screens, a couple who'd had Sir Jimmy turn up unannounced at their wedding.
He just turned up. I didn't even know, I'd only seen him on Jim Will Fix It. So I got to end at aisle and he just jumped up in his tracksuit and I was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it, you know.
Family, close friends and fellow veteran DJs packed the cathedral. We heard tributes from his nephew Roger Foster.
He loved life, he loved people, and everyone who met him and knew him also loved him.
And Sir Jimmy's friend Howard Silverman also paid tribute.
What can I possibly say about a man who raised £40 million for charity? He was friends with prime ministers, presidents, Elvis, the Beatles.
Then, after final goodbyes from mourners here, Sir Jimmy's coffin was taken from the cathedral to the sound of the last post.
So those are just a few clips of what you're able to do on an iPhone. And the clips that you'll have heard from Radio Aire are part of the entry that we put them in for the IRNs, and it's earned them the nomination for News Team of the Year. Fingers crossed they get that. It's announced later on this month. But not only are the capabilities of the iPhone and a smartphone key in any working newsroom these days, but also the size and the flexibility in terms of you can go anywhere you like and report and provide good coverage of any event. You'll notice at the start of that we had audio of Charlotte. She was literally in the centre of protesters in Sheffield when the Lib Dems came for their first major party conference in the city. That would not have been possible when we had big pieces of kit, because it would have drawn too much attention. People would have taken too much of an interest in the actual journalist and less of the events that are going on. And that's something that we're finding a lot, that actually it pays to be inconspicuous at certain things like that and potentially volatile situations. Not only do we do live reports, because I know I've spoken a lot about actual just audio, but we also update our Twitter accounts, our Facebook pages for the station. We're constantly producing and publishing website articles, photos, videos, and we're doing as much as we can to cover as many mediums as possible. And I think when you're working in a radio newsroom, you'll be expected to do this. So the more you can learn about new technology and evolving technology, the better you'll be in terms of being prepared to go into a newsroom, because this isn't thought of as special anymore. This is kind of expected. You're expected to know how social networking works and the benefits of it. You're expected to know how to upload a video and how to edit it. And you're expected to know how to update the website. And all of these are key aspects of any kind of broadcasting today. That's one of the most exciting things I think about radio and local radio, is the fact that it is constantly evolving and we're constantly having to adapt to incorporate new forms of technology and new ways of actually broadcasting. But that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love local radio and local commercial radio in particular. So that kind of brings me to the end of my little talk today. I'm more than happy. I think we've got a couple of 10 minutes to answer any questions if you have any. Yeah.
What's the demographic for your station?
For Hallam FM, it's between 25 and 44, although we're making a move to make that slightly older at the moment. Radio Aire is slightly younger, and Viking FM over in Hull is kind of midway between the two.
You mentioned earlier on about which having a sort of higher profile commercial BBC. In Hull, I would say Viking FM has a much sort of higher profile, more well known and more listened to than BBC Radio Humberside. So you were suggesting over here this is slightly different.
No, I was suggesting that the general perception is that sometimes that the BBCs are better funded and better resourced and sometimes better at doing local news. What I was trying to prove there was the fact that that's not always the case.
But in terms of their popularity, the Viking FM popularity would far outweigh BBC Radio Humberside.
Potentially on occasion, yes, they can for certain things. I mean, obviously BBC is, they have a much higher ratio of talk and we are more focused on music. And that's what you'll find with commercial radio, is they have the flexibility. If they need to go more talk-based and they need to provide more in-depth coverage, they can do. But predominantly, it is about the music with commercial radio. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Compared to obviously commercial, BBC.
Yes.
And that's thank you. Would you say this is somewhat been of detriment to the newsroom itself? Because there have been a lot of people that have been let go. You can't sort of avoid that. There has been a lot of changes just recently. How has your job changed through this process?
I personally have been lucky enough to work for companies where actually we haven't seen the same size of redundancies and changes in the newsroom that other companies have. I always think it's quite sad when you see newsrooms being reduced and cut back, and I'm always quite sad when you see that element of a radio station disappearing. As I mentioned at the start, I think Bauer is good in that sense because they do provide that commitment to local radio news. In terms of redundancies and reductions, we haven't seen that in Bauer, and as far as I'm aware, we're not going to be seeing that. Across the 3 sites, I've got a team of 11, which in terms of a commercial radio newsroom is quite large. I have worked in newsrooms where there have been 2 people, and they're expected to cover absolutely everything and do all the reading. And there are certain limitations to people's time and energy and the stuff that they can cover. So in terms of commercial, yes, overall we have seen some redundancies. In Bauer particularly, we haven't seen those.
Okay, and has that added extra pressure to your work?
I don't think it adds any extra pressure, purely because I think what you'll find with the people that work in newsrooms everywhere is the fact that they're always passionate and dedicated about doing the best that they can. So it hasn't kind of encouraged them to work any harder or do anything more because they're already operating at their top level. And I think whether or not, friends and colleagues are being made redundant or not, it doesn't mean that you then work harder, because I would like to think, and I know in my team, they're all already working as hard as they can, and that's why we're getting the results that we're getting. Yeah.
Because you're commercially funded,
yeah.
Who are you directly responsible? Would you say you're responsible to the listeners, or the businesses that fund you, or the commissioners?
Obviously, we're not the BBC, and so we do have to be mindful that we have clients and we have people who spend a lot of money with the radio station, and we don't want to do something that would alienate them or stop them spending with us. But at the end of the day, we are a newsroom and our job is to report on the news. So if we were to get an occasion whereby we had a story that involved one of our clients, we would handle it in the same way as we would handle anything else. We would offer them the right to reply, and as long as our report was balanced and fair, I would hope that they would understand the reason as to why we had to report it. Yeah.
How much on-the-job training do you offer to your journalist, or to somebody coming into work for you new? Do they hit the ground running, or do you provide updating with technology and so on? Are people really expected to keep up to date with that themselves?
There is an element that it is up to the individual to make sure that they know as much as possible about what's going on and what's out there. But one thing that we really prioritise is training. We offer daily coaching sessions and we offer intensive courses around the group, depending on where the needs lie. I would hope that somebody coming in to a radio station these days would already know how to operate an iPhone. They would know all about social networking and that kind of stuff. But anything that they didn't know, that's why I'm there to help provide the training, and for stuff that I'm not aware of, we have those people within the company, and because it's such a big company, we have the ability that we can organise for that training to happen. We've got in our team a lot of very new starters. We've got a guy in Sheffield called Glenn, and he actually was offered the job before he finished his postgraduate course based on the potential that he'd shown in a work placement. And he's doing absolutely fantastically. We've got Corinne, who studied here and literally just graduated in December.
Just graduated now, yes.
In December. She's at Viking FM and doing a fantastic job. She's our main reporter over there. So in terms of, if you're asking if they're fairly inexperienced, do they have less chance of getting a job than somebody who's been in it for years? Then actually no, because there are different roles within each news team and there are different capabilities that everybody has, and I like to have as much of a mix as possible. So yes, we've got some very experienced people, but we've also got some brand new journalists, and I think that makes quite a nice mix to work with. Anyone else? Yes?
Who are the main sponsors for the stations?
We don't really have main sponsors. We obviously have breakfast show sponsors and drive time show sponsors. But in terms of, do we have a main sponsor that funds the entire radio station, then the answer is no. Because we have a lot of adverts, which you'll hear, and obviously people pay to have those adverts played. And so it's a culmination of that and events that we put on and competitions that we might run. One of the things that we are now doing, and most radio stations are doing in the commercial sector, is running competitions whereby you text in to enter, and actually you pay to enter those competitions. And that's one way that we generate revenue as well. Okay. I think we're all done.
There we go. Well, thank you very much indeed for questions. Are there any further questions for Louise at this point? Well, I think that shows what it's possible to achieve with the power of radio, with the power of commercial radio, and also an indication of where some of our Leeds Trinity alumni have gone over the years. How many of those 11 journalists you've got are from here, one way or another? Just off the top of your head.
Including myself, turn my microphone off. Including myself, I would say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5
so
out of a team of 11, so almost half.
Just about half the team there. So a good chance, good relationship there. I'm sure we'd like to thank Louise very much for coming in and sharing her insights this morning.